My mom read my journal about my crush, and then she arranged an exorcism to cure my demonic lust. I kept the journal hidden inside a hollowed-out book on my shelf, the kind with a secret compartment carved into the pages. I'd been writing in it for 6 months, mostly about Jasmine, the girl who sat 2 rows ahead of me in AP Literature and wore her hair in 2 long braids that reached her waist. I wrote about how her laugh made my stomach flip, how she bit her lip when she was concentrating on an essay, how I wanted to hold her hand more than I'd ever wanted anything. I was 17 and had never told anyone I liked girls, especially not my mother, who ran the youth ministry at our Pentecostal church and spoke in tongues during every service. The journal was my only safe space to admit the truth about myself, filled with pages of longing and confusion and prayers asking God to help me understand why I felt this way. I came home from school on a Wednesday afternoon and found my mother sitting on my bed with the journal open in her lap. Her face was streaked with tears and her hands shook as she held the pages. She looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, somewhere between horror and grief, like I'd just told her I was dying. "Naomi," she whispered, her voice cracking on my name. "What is this?" I felt my blood turn to ice. My backpack slipped from my shoulder and hit the floor with a thud. I tried to form words, but my throat had closed up completely. She stood and held the journal out toward me, open to a page where I'd written Jasmine's name over and over, surrounded by hearts I'd doodled during study hall. "I was looking for your birth certificate for the college applications," she said, her voice getting louder, "and I found this hidden in your room, hidden like you knew it was wrong." I grabbed for the journal, but she pulled it back. Her tears were flowing freely now, and she started flipping through pages, reading my most private thoughts out loud in a voice thick with disgust. The entry about wanting to kiss Jasmine after the school play. The one where I described dreaming about her. The page where I'd written that maybe being attracted to girls wasn't a sin, that maybe God made me this way. My mother's face went from grief to rage in seconds. She threw the journal across the room and it hit my dresser, knocking over a framed photo of our family. "This is not how God made you," she said through clenched teeth. "This is demonic influence. This is Satan twisting your natural desires into perversion." I tried to explain that I'd been praying about it, that I'd been asking God for guidance, but she wasn't listening. She grabbed my shoulders hard enough to leave marks and shook me. "How long has this been going on? Have you acted on these feelings? Have you touched her?" I shook my head violently, tears streaming down my face. "No, I've never even talked to her about it. It's just feelings, Mom. Just thoughts." She let go of me and paced my room, her breathing rapid and shallow. "Just thoughts," she repeated mockingly. "Jesus said that lustful thoughts are the same as committing the act. You've been sinning in your heart for months, filling your mind with homosexual fantasies." She spat the word homosexual like it was poison. I sank onto my bed, my whole body shaking. I didn't choose this. I didn't ask to feel this way. My mother stopped pacing and stared at me with cold eyes. "The enemy works through our weaknesses. He finds the cracks in our armor and exploits them. You've been vulnerable and he's gotten in." She pulled her phone from her pocket and started typing frantically. I asked who she was texting, but she ignored me. Within minutes, my father came home early from work, his tie loosened and his face flushed. My mother must have sent him alarming messages because he looked panicked when he walked into my room. She handed him the journal without a word, and he read a few pages, his expression darkening with each line. "This can't be real," he said finally, looking at me like I was a stranger. "Our daughter isn't gay. She's just confused." My mother shook her head. "It's more than confusion. It's spiritual warfare. We need to act immediately before this takes deeper root." She'd already called Pastor Vincent, the head of our church, and he was on his way to our house. Pastor Vincent arrived 30 minutes later with his wife Eleanor and 2 other church elders I recognized from Sunday services. They gathered in our living room while I sat on the couch, feeling like I was on trial. My journal sat on the coffee table between us, evidence of my corruption. Pastor Vincent was a large man with a booming voice who'd always seemed kind during his sermons, but now he looked at me with something close to revulsion. He asked me to confirm that I'd written everything in the journal, and I nodded, unable to speak. "And you understand these are sinful desires," he stated, not asked. "Desires that go against God's natural order and the clear teaching of Scripture." I wanted to argue to point out that Jesus never actually said anything about homosexuality, but the words died in my throat. Eleanor leaned forward, her expression softer than the others. "Have you been exposed to any media promoting this lifestyle? Television shows, books, internet content?" I thought about the few LGBTQ novels I'd checked out from the school library and read in secret. "Just some books," I admitted quietly. My mother made a sound of distress. "What books? Show me." I led them all to my room where they proceeded to go through my bookshelf, pulling out anything they deemed suspicious. They found 3 novels with gay characters and added them to a pile on my desk. They went through my laptop next, checking my browser history despite my protests. I'd been careful to use incognito mode. But they found my YouTube subscriptions, which included a few LGBTQ content creators who talked about their experiences. Pastor Vincent watched some of the videos with disgust clear on his face. "This is how the enemy works," he announced to the room. "He uses media to normalize perversion, to make our children think these sinful desires are acceptable." He turned to my parents. Your daughter has been under a sustained spiritual attack. The demonic influence is clear. We need to perform a deliverance. I'd seen deliverances before at church. Violent affairs where people screamed and thrashed while the pastors prayed over them, casting out demons they claimed were possessing the person. The thought of that happening to me made my stomach turn. Please, I begged, looking at my father. Dad, please don't do this. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother was already clearing furniture in the living room, pushing our couch against the wall to create space in the center. Pastor Vincent directed the two elders to stand on either side of me. They each took one of my arms and guided me to stand in the cleared space. I tried to pull away, but their grips tightened. The more you resist, the more it proves the demon's hold, Pastor Vincent said calmly. Eleanor brought oil from her purse and handed it to the pastor. He opened the bottle, and the smell of frankincense filled the room. We're going to pray over you and command the spirit of homosexuality to leave your body, he explained. You need to submit completely to the process and not fight against the deliverance God wants to bring. He placed his oiled hand on my forehead and began praying in tongues, the rapid-fire syllables that always sounded like nonsense to me. My mother joined in, her voice high and shrill. The two elders holding my arms started praying too, their hands gripping tighter as they shouted about binding demons and breaking chains. The oil ran down my face and into my eyes, making them burn. I tried to wipe it away but couldn't move my arms. Pastor Vincent's voice grew louder, commanding the demon of lust to manifest and be expelled. Come out of her! I command you in Jesus' name. I stood there crying, my whole body trembling, while they shouted prayers and commands around me. This went on for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. They kept expecting some dramatic reaction, some sign that a demon was leaving my body, but I just cried and begged them to stop. Finally, Pastor Vincent stepped back, breathing hard. The demon is stubborn. We need a more intensive approach. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite hear. When he hung up, he turned to my parents with a serious expression. There's a ministry that specializes in cases like this. They have a residential program specifically designed to help young people overcome homosexual attraction through intensive spiritual counseling and deliverance. My mother's eyes lit up with desperate hope. Where is it? How soon can she go? Pastor Vincent pulled up information on his phone. It's called Restoration Harbor. They're in Montana. They can take her as soon as this weekend if we can get the paperwork done. My father hesitated. Montana? That's across the country. What about school? She's in her senior year. Pastor Vincent fixed him with a stern look. What's more important, her education or her eternal soul? If we don't address this now, if we let her graduate and go off to college with these perverted desires, she'll fall into a lifestyle of sin and destruction. He showed them the website on his phone, images of smiling teenagers in a rustic mountain setting, testimonials from parents thanking the program for saving their children. My mother was already nodding, wiping her tears. We'll do whatever it takes. Money isn't an issue. I felt panic rising in my chest. No, I'm not going to some conversion camp. That's not legal. You can't make me. Pastor Vincent's expression hardened. You're a minor. Your parents have the legal right to send you wherever they deem necessary for your well-being. And make no mistake, this is about your well-being, both spiritual and physical. Homosexuality leads to disease, depression, and ultimately, hell. I looked at my father, pleading with my eyes. Dad, please, don't send me away. I'll go to counseling here. I'll do whatever you want, just don't send me to Montana. For a moment, I thought I saw doubt flicker across his face, but my mother grabbed his hand and squeezed. We have to do this, she said firmly. We can't let our daughter be destroyed by this. That night, I lay in my bed listening to my parents talk to Pastor Vincent in the living room below. They were filling out intake forms for Restoration Harbor, discussing flight arrangements and how to handle withdrawing me from school. I felt like I was drowning, like the walls were closing in and there was no way out. I grabbed my phone from my nightstand and texted the only person I could think of who might help my older cousin Leah, who'd left our church 3 years ago after getting pregnant before marriage. My family still maintained some contact with her. Though my mother always spoke about her with disappointment, I typed quickly, Mom found my journal. They're trying to send me to conversion therapy in Montana. Please help. I watched the screen, praying she'd see it quickly. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her response came through. I'm calling you now. Answer quietly. My phone vibrated with her call, and I pressed it to my ear, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. Leah? Naomi? Listen carefully. Do not get on that plane. Those places are dangerous. Kids have died at programs like that. Her voice was urgent and frightened. Can you get to my apartment? I'm 4 hours away, but I can come get you. I explained that my parents weren't letting me out of their sight, that they'd probably lock my door tonight to make sure I didn't run. Leah was quiet for a moment, thinking, okay, here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow at school, tell your guidance counselor everything. Tell them about the exorcism, about the program in Montana, all of it. They're mandated reporters. They have to intervene if a student is being abused. I'd never thought of what happened tonight as abuse, but hearing Leah say it out loud made something click. Will they really help? My parents will just say it's their religious right. Leah's voice was firm. Religious freedom doesn't cover sending kids to programs where they're psychologically tortured. Trust me on this. Talk to your counselor first thing tomorrow. And Naomi, I love you exactly as you are. There's nothing wrong with you. I started crying again, but this time from relief that someone understood. We hung up and I hid my phone under my pillow in case my parents tried to take it. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my door, and then the click of a lock. They'd actually locked me in, trapping me in my own room like a prisoner. The next morning, my mother unlocked my door and stood in the doorway watching as I got dressed for school. She'd taken all my books with gay characters and thrown them away, along with my journal. "You'll get your things back when you demonstrate you're healed," she said coldly. The warmth that usually filled her voice when she spoke to me was completely gone. I nodded and grabbed my backpack, afraid to speak in case she changed her mind about letting me go to school. The car ride was silent. My father drove and my mother sat in the passenger seat, both of them staring straight ahead. When we pulled up to the school, my mother turned around to face me. "Come straight home after your last class. We're going to the church tonight to meet with Pastor Vincent again before your flight on Friday." Friday. That gave me one day. I had today and tomorrow to figure out how to stop this. I nodded and got out of the car, watching them drive away before I ran toward the main building. The guidance office opened at 7 and it was only 6:45, so I waited in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Mrs. Adelaide Thornton, my guidance counselor, arrived at 7:02 carrying a coffee and looking surprised to see me waiting outside her door. "Naomi, is everything okay?" I shook my head and felt tears starting again. "Can I talk to you privately? It's urgent." She unlocked her office quickly and ushered me inside, closing the door behind us. The office was small but comfortable, with plants on the windowsill and motivational posters on the walls. She sat behind her desk and gestured for me to take the chair across from her. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and started from the beginning, finding my mother with my journal. The exorcism attempt last night, the program in Montana that they wanted to send me to on Friday. Mrs. Thornton's expression grew more horrified with each detail I shared. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with concern. "Naomi, what happened to you last night constitutes abuse, and the program they want to send you to sounds like conversion therapy, which has been condemned by every major medical and psychological organization as harmful." I felt a wave of relief that someone with authority was validating my fears. "Can you stop them?" My cousin said guidance counselors are mandated reporters. Mrs. Thornton nodded. "I am, and I'm going to make a report to Child Protective Services right now. But I need you to understand that the process takes time. CPS will investigate, but they may not be able to prevent your parents from taking you to Montana if they do it before the investigation concludes." The hope I'd been feeling crumbled. "So, I might still have to go?" She hesitated. "I'm going to do everything I can to prevent that. Let me make some calls." She picked up her phone and dialed a number, explaining the situation to whoever answered. I sat there feeling numb, listening to her use words like urgent and immediate intervention. After several calls, she turned back to me with a plan. "I've contacted CPS and they're sending someone here today to interview you. I've also reached out to an organization called Rainbow Youth Alliance that helps LGBTQ teens in crisis. They have legal resources and emergency housing if needed." She pulled up their website and wrote down a phone number for me. "Keep this with you at all times. If your parents try to take you to the airport before CPS intervenes, call this number immediately." The CPS caseworker arrived during second period. Mrs. Thornton excused me from class, and I met with a woman named Gabriela Reyes in a private conference room. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She asked me to go through everything again in detail. Recording our conversation on her phone with my permission, I showed her the bruises on my arms where the church elders had gripped me during the exorcism, and she took photos from multiple angles. "I'm going to be honest with you," Gabriela said when we finished. "Cases involving religious practices are complicated legally. Your parents will argue this falls under their First Amendment rights, but the physical restraint and the psychological harm of conversion therapy give us grounds to intervene." She explained that she'd be visiting my home that afternoon to interview my parents and assess the situation. "In the meantime, you should go to your classes and try to act normal. Don't give them any reason to think you've reported them." I went to my remaining classes in a daze, barely hearing anything my teacher said. Jasmine tried to catch my eye during AP Lit, but I couldn't look at her, knowing my feelings for her had triggered this nightmare. After school, I followed Gabriela's advice and went straight home. My mother was waiting in the kitchen with a forced smile. "How was school?" she asked, her voice artificially cheerful. "Fine," I mumbled, heading toward my room. She stopped me with a hand on my arm. "The youth group is having a prayer meeting tonight. I think it would be good for you to attend." I knew what that meant. Another session of people praying over me, trying to cast out demons that didn't exist. But I nodded and went to my room to wait. Around 5, the doorbell rang. I heard my mother answer, and then Gabriela's voice identifying herself as being from Child Protective Services. There was a long pause before my mother let her in. I crept to the top of the stairs to listen. Gabriela explained she was following up on a report of abuse and needed to speak with my parents and inspect the home. My mother's voice went cold. This is religious persecution. We've done nothing wrong. We're trying to help our daughter overcome sin. Gabriella remained calm. I understand this involves your religious beliefs, but I need to ensure Naomi's safety. Can you tell me about the events of last night? My father had come home by then, and he tried to explain their perspective, talking about demonic influence and spiritual warfare. Gabriella listened patiently, and then asked to speak with me alone. They called me downstairs, and my mother's eyes burned with anger as I passed her to join Gabriella in the living room. We sat on the couch while my parents went into the kitchen, though I could feel them listening from the other room. "Are you okay?" Gabriella asked quietly. I nodded, though I wasn't really. She asked me to describe my current living situation, whether I felt safe, whether my parents had made any threats. I told her about being locked in my room last night and showed her the bruises that had darkened overnight. She made notes and then called my parents back in. "I'm going to be direct," she told them. "What you did last night constitutes unlawful restraint, and the program you're planning to send Naomi to has been linked to severe psychological harm and even deaths of participants. I strongly advise against taking her there." My mother's face flushed red. "You have no right to tell us how to raise our daughter. This is about her immortal soul." Gabriella pulled out official-looking paperwork from her bag. "I'm issuing a safety plan that requires you not to physically restrain Naomi or subject her to any more exorcism-type interventions. If you violate this plan, I will petition for emergency removal." My father spoke up. "And if we still want to take her to the program in Montana, that's our legal right as her parents." Gabriella's expression hardened. "If you attempt to remove her from the state before my investigation concludes, I will file for an emergency custody order. And I should warn you that Montana has been investigating Restoration Harbor for multiple abuse allegations. The facility may not even be operational by the time you try to get there." I watched my mother's face cycle through shock, anger, and fear. My father looked defeated. Gabriella stood to leave, handing my parents her card. "I'll be conducting follow-up visits. In the meantime, I'm recommending family therapy with a counselor who specializes in LGBTQ youth." After she left, my parents sat in silence for a long moment. Then my mother turned to me with cold fury. "You called CPS on us. You betrayed your own family." I wanted to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. My father held up his hand. "What's done is done. We need to figure out our next steps." That night, they held a family meeting at the kitchen table. My younger sister Kira, who was 14, sat next to me looking confused. She hadn't been told about any of this. My mother explained in vague terms that I was struggling with temptation and that the family needed to support me through prayer and accountability. Kira looked at me with questions in her eyes but didn't ask them. My father laid out new rules. I wasn't allowed to use my laptop unsupervised. My phone would be collected each night and returned in the morning. I couldn't go anywhere except school and church without one of them accompanying me. I was essentially under house arrest. Over the next week, Gabriella visited twice more. Each time, my parents put on a show of being cooperative, talking about finding a local Christian counselor and respecting the safety plan. But the moment she left, the coldness returned. My mother barely spoke to me except to give instructions. My father avoided eye contact. Kira tried to talk to me once, asking what I'd done to make Mom and Dad so upset, but I couldn't tell her. One afternoon after school, Mrs. Thornton called me to her office. She had someone with her, a woman in her 40s, who introduced herself as Joyce Fletcher from Rainbow Youth Alliance. Joyce explained that they'd been following my case through Mrs. Thornton and wanted to offer support. "We have legal resources if your parents continue pushing for conversion therapy," Joyce said, "and we have emergency housing if you need a safe place." The thought of leaving my home was terrifying, but so was staying. I thanked her and took the information packet she offered. That night at youth group, Pastor Vincent led a discussion about sexual purity and God's design for relationships. He never mentioned me by name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. I felt 20 pairs of eyes on me as he talked about how the culture was trying to normalize perversion and lead young people astray. After the service, several youth group members avoided me, but one girl, Bethany, pulled me aside in the parking lot. "I just want you to know that not everyone here agrees with what they're doing to you," she whispered quickly, glancing around to make sure no one heard. "My brother is gay, and my family kicked him out. I watched what it did to him. If you need help, here's my number." She pressed a piece of paper into my hand before her mother called her name. I put it in my pocket, feeling a tiny bit less alone. The following week, my parents announced they'd found a Christian counselor named Dr. Marcus Hayes, who specialized in helping people overcome same-sex attraction. I didn't want to go, but didn't have a choice. Dr. Hayes' office was in a converted house with biblical artwork on the walls and a cross above his desk. He was maybe 50 with graying hair and a gentle voice that immediately put me on edge. The first session was just him and me. He asked about my childhood, my relationship with my parents. When I first noticed attraction to girls, I answered carefully, aware that anything I said would be reported back to my parents. Many people experience same-sex attraction as a result of early trauma or unhealthy family dynamics, he explained. By identifying and healing these root causes, we can redirect your attractions toward their natural, God-given purpose. I wanted to argue that I hadn't experienced trauma, that my family was fine until they found my journal, but I bit my tongue. The sessions continued twice a week. Dr. Hayes used a mix of prayer, cognitive exercises to replace wrong thinking patterns, and assignments where I had to document any attractions to girls and immediately counter them with scripture memorization. It was exhausting and made me feel dirty every time I noticed a girl was pretty. Meanwhile, at school, word had somehow gotten out that I was gay. I suspected someone from youth group had talked, maybe without realizing how quickly rumors spread. I went from being mostly invisible to being actively avoided. Girls who used to sit with me at lunch found other tables. Someone wrote a slur on my locker in permanent marker. The few friends I had distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with me. Jasmine, who I'd never spoken to despite months of writing about her, looked at me with pity once in the hallway. That somehow felt worse than the hatred. The only bright spots were my sessions with Mrs. Thornton, who checked in with me regularly, and the messages of support from Joyce at Rainbow Youth Alliance. Joyce sent me articles about conversion therapy survivors and information about my rights. She explained that at 17 in our state, I had limited legal autonomy, but that if I could hold out until I turned 18 in 8 months, I'd be free to make my own choices. 8 months felt like forever. One evening in November, about 6 weeks after my mother found the journal, things came to a head. My father called a family meeting and announced that despite CPS involvement, they'd decided to move forward with sending me to a program not Restoration Harbor in Montana, but a similar facility in Texas that had recently opened. We've consulted with our attorney, my father explained. As long as the program is licensed and we can demonstrate it's therapeutic rather than punitive, CPS can't stop us from sending you there. My mother added, "We've given the counseling here a fair chance, but you're not making progress. Dr. Hayes says you're resistant to the process." I felt panic rising. I'm doing everything he asks. I'm memorizing scripture. I'm documenting my thoughts. I'm praying constantly. My mother's expression was hard, "But you're not changing. You haven't renounced these feelings. You haven't committed to pursuing a normal, godly life." She pulled out papers from a folder and slid them across the table. "The program starts December 5th. That gives you 3 weeks to get your affairs in order." I grabbed my phone from my pocket, thinking of the numbers I'd saved. Rainbow Youth Alliance. Gabriella from CPS. Cousin Leah. My father reached across the table and took my phone. "We've decided you don't need this anymore. It's only causing problems." That night, I waited until my parents went to bed and then crept downstairs to the kitchen phone. I dialed Gabriella's number from memory, praying she'd answer at 11 at night. She picked up on the third ring, her voice groggy. "This is Gabriella Reyes." "It's Naomi," I whispered. "They're sending me to Texas in 3 weeks to a conversion therapy program. They have an attorney and they say you can't stop them." I heard rustling as she woke up fully. "Stay calm. I'm going to file an emergency petition first thing tomorrow morning. Can you get to school safely?" I confirmed that I could, and she told me to tell Mrs. Thornton everything immediately. "And Naomi, pack a bag with essentials and keep it hidden, just in case." I spent the next hour quietly packing a backpack with clothes, toiletries, and the information Joyce had given me. I hid it in the back of my closet behind old toys. The next morning, I told Mrs. Thornton about the Texas program during the 30-minute window before first period. She immediately called Gabriella, and they arranged a meeting for after school. I went through my classes in a fog of anxiety, barely able to concentrate. When the final bell rang, I found Gabriella waiting in Mrs. Thornton's office with another person, a lawyer named Patricia Zhou from a child advocacy organization. Patricia explained that they were filing an emergency petition to prevent my parents from sending me out of state until a full custody hearing could be held. "The problem is that these hearings take time, and December 5th is only 3 weeks away," she said carefully. "We may not get a ruling before then." My heart sank. "So they can still take me?" Patricia exchanged a look with Gabriella. "There is another option. We can place you in protective custody voluntarily. You'd stay with a foster family or in a group home temporarily while the case proceeds." The thought of leaving my home, my sister, everything I knew was overwhelming, but the thought of being sent to a conversion therapy program was worse. "How long would I be in foster care?" Gabriella answered honestly. "It depends on how the case resolves. Possibly until you turn 18 in May, or possibly longer if your parents fight the custody decision." I thought about my sister Kira, who'd been trying to talk to me, but I'd been too afraid to open up to her. I thought about my room, my books, the life I'd known even if it wasn't perfect. But then I thought about being shipped off to Texas, about spending months in a program designed to break me down and convince me I was broken. "I'll do it," I said quietly. "I'll go into protective custody." The next few hours passed in a blur. Patricia filed the emergency petition and got a hearing scheduled for that afternoon. Gabriella called my parents and informed them of the situation. I waited in Mrs. Thornton's office, drinking bad coffee and trying not to think about what was happening. Around 4, we went to the courthouse. My parents were already there with Pastor Vincent and their attorney. My mother looked at me with such hatred that I had to look away. The hearing was quick. The judge, an older woman named Alana Cortez, reviewed the documentation, Gabriella's reports, Dr. Hayes' notes that ironically supported our case by showing how harmful the counseling had been, information about the Texas program, and its history of abuse allegations. Patricia argued that sending me out of state would cause irreparable harm and violated my rights. My parents' attorney argued about religious freedom and parental authority. Judge Cortez listened to both sides and then turned to me. Naomi, do you want to be placed in protective custody? Her voice was kind but formal. Yes, Your Honor, I managed to say. She nodded. I'm granting the emergency petition. Naomi will be placed in state custody pending a full hearing on December 15th. The parents are prohibited from removing her from the state or subjecting her to conversion therapy. My mother gasped and started crying. My father put his arm around her, glaring at me like I'd betrayed them in the worst possible way. Maybe I had. Maybe this was betrayal. But it was also survival. Gabriella drove me to a foster home that evening. The family was named the Johnsons, a middle-aged couple with 2 biological children who were away at college. They'd fostered LGBTQ youth before and knew how to handle the situation with sensitivity. Mrs. Johnson, who insisted I call her Grace, showed me to a small bedroom with a window overlooking their backyard. This is yours for as long as you need it, she said warmly. No judgment, no pressure, just a safe place to figure things out. I set down the backpack I'd grabbed from school and looked around the room. It was plain, but comfortable, with a desk and a bookshelf and posters asking what music or art I liked. For the first time in 2 months, I felt like I could breathe. The next few weeks were strange. I continued going to my same school, but now I left from the Johnsons' house instead of my parents'. I saw Kira in the hallways sometimes, and she'd look at me with confusion and hurt, not understanding why I'd left. I wanted to explain, but didn't know how. My parents sent messages through their attorney demanding I return home, promising they'd drop the Texas plan if I came back. But Patricia advised me not to trust those promises, and I didn't. The court case moved forward with depositions and evidence gathering. Dr. Hayes' treatment notes became crucial evidence, showing how the therapy had been traumatizing rather than helpful. Pastor Vincent was deposed about the exorcism, and his descriptions of what they'd done shocked even the court reporter. My journal, which my mother had thrown away but which I'd photographed pages from before she found it, showed that my feelings for girls had existed long before any supposed outside influence. I wasn't corrupted by media or demonic forces. I was just gay, and I'd been terrified to admit it even to myself. The full custody hearing happened on December 15th as scheduled. Both sides presented their cases over 2 days of testimony. My parents' attorney brought in experts who claimed homosexuality could be changed through faith and counseling. Patricia brought in actual medical professionals who testified about the harm of conversion therapy and the fact that sexual orientation isn't a choice or a mental illness. I had to testify about the exorcism, about being restrained and having oil poured on me while people shouted about demons. I described the counseling sessions with Dr. Hayes where I was taught to hate part of myself. I talked about the isolation at school and at church, how I'd gone from having a community to being completely alone. My mother testified too, crying as she explained how she'd just been trying to save my soul, how she couldn't bear the thought of losing me to sin. My father talked about his duty as a parent to guide me toward righteousness. Pastor Vincent spoke about spiritual warfare and the obligation of Christian parents. By the end of the second day, I was exhausted and emotionally drained. Judge Cortez said she'd issue a ruling within a week. I went back to the Johnsons' house and slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, Grace had made pancakes and sat with me at the kitchen table. However this turns out, she said gently, you're going to be okay. You're strong and brave, and there's a whole community of people ready to support you. The ruling came 5 days later. Judge Cortez had written a detailed decision explaining her reasoning. She found that my parents' actions, while motivated by religious belief, constituted abuse that endangered my mental health and well-being. She granted temporary custody to the state until I turned 18 in May, at which point I'd age out of the system and be free to make my own choices. My parents were allowed supervised visitation if I consented, but they couldn't discuss religion or sexual orientation during those visits. They immediately filed an appeal. While the appeal process dragged on, I settled into my new life at the Johnsons. I started seeing a real therapist, Dr. Yolanda Simmons, who specialized in LGBTQ youth and religious trauma. She helped me understand that there was nothing wrong with being gay, that my parents' reaction said more about their fears than about my worth. Slowly, I started to rebuild myself. At school, Mrs. Thornton connected me with the small but active Gay-Straight Alliance. I attended my first meeting nervously, expecting judgment or awkwardness, but instead found acceptance. There were 5 other students, including Bethany from youth group, who'd given me her number. We met weekly to plan events and support each other. It was the first time I'd been around other LGBTQ people my age, and it was both exciting and terrifying. One afternoon in February, Jasmine approached me after AP Lit. Hey, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I heard you joined GSA. That's cool. My heart started racing like it had every time I'd written about her in my journal. Yeah, it's been good. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment before she smiled. Would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? Like, as friends? I nodded, not trusting my voice. We exchanged numbers and went our separate ways, but I couldn't stop smiling for the rest of the day. The coffee meetup turned into regular hangouts. Jasmine told me she was bisexual and had been out since freshman year, that she'd noticed me noticing her in AP Lit and thought I might be queer too. I wanted to say something, she admitted over our third coffee date, but you seemed so scared. I didn't want to out you or make things worse. I told her about the journal, about everything that had happened, She listened without judgment and then reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "You're really brave," she said. And by March, the Johnsons had become more than just foster parents. They'd become family. Grace taught me to cook vegetarian meals, and we'd spend evenings trying new recipes. Her husband, David, helped me research colleges and fill out applications, including one to a small liberal arts school 3 hours away. With a strong LGBTQ support system, I got accepted in April with a partial scholarship. My 18th birthday came on May 10th. The Johnsons threw me a small party with the GSA members. Mrs. Thornton, Gabriella, and Patricia in attendance. Jasmine gave me a journal with rainbow patterns on the cover. "For better memories," she said. I legally aged out of foster care that day, which meant I was free from my parents' custody. The appeal they'd filed was still pending, but it no longer mattered. I was an adult who could make my own choices. A week later, Kira reached out through social media. She asked if we could meet, said she had questions about everything that happened. We met at a neutral coffee shop with Grace waiting nearby in case I needed support. Kira looked older than I remembered, more mature. "Mom and Dad won't talk about you," she said quietly. "They act like you died or something. But I need to understand what happened." I explained everything as gently as I could. The journal, the exorcism, the conversion therapy plan. I told her I was gay and that wasn't going to change, that I'd had to leave to protect myself. Kira listened with tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand why they couldn't just love you anyway," she said. "You're still my sister. Nothing changed about who you are." We cried together and made plans to stay in touch. She couldn't defy our parents openly while still living with them, but we'd find ways to maintain our relationship. Graduation came in June. My parents didn't attend, though I'd sent them an invitation through Patricia. But the Johnsons were there, along with Mrs. Thornton, Gabriella, Joyce from Rainbow Youth Alliance, and Jasmine. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I heard them cheering loudly. Pastor Vincent was in the audience with several youth group members, supporting other graduating seniors from church. He deliberately looked away when my name was called, but Bethany caught my eye from her seat and gave me a thumbs up. That summer before college, I worked at a bookstore and saved money for my dorm room. Jasmine and I made our relationship official, though we both knew we'd have to navigate long distance when she went to a different school in the fall. The Johnsons let me stay with them rent-free, treating me like one of their own children. In August, I helped Kira move into college herself. Our parents had dropped her off and left immediately, uncomfortable being in the same place where I might appear. Kira and I spent the day setting up her dorm and talking about our futures. She'd been accepted to a school with a strong sociology program and wanted to work with at-risk youth. "Because of what happened to you," she explained, "I want to help kids who are being rejected by their families for being themselves." Before I left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "I'm proud of you, and I love you no matter what." Those words meant more than I could express. When I started college in September, I joined the campus LGBTQ organization immediately. I declared a psychology major, thinking about Dr. Simmons and how much her support had meant to me, wanting to provide that for others someday. I made friends who'd never known me as the girl who'd been exorcised, who only knew me as Naomi, who liked poetry and cute girls and terrible horror movies. Jasmine visited twice that first semester, and we made it work despite the distance. The Johnsons called weekly to check in, and Grace sent care packages with homemade cookies. One November afternoon, I got an unexpected email. It was from my mother, the first direct contact we'd had in over a year. She wrote that she'd been in therapy, that her therapist had helped her understand how much damage she'd caused by trying to fix something that wasn't broken. She didn't apologize exactly, but she acknowledged that she'd been wrong to handle things the way she did. She asked if we could talk sometime, maybe over coffee. With no pressure or expectations, I showed the email to Dr. Simmons during my next therapy session. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore the email, to keep the door closed and move forward without looking back. But another part of me remembered the mother who'd braided my hair and sung to me at bedtime, before she found the journal and everything changed. "I think I want to meet her," I said finally. "But on my terms, in public, with someone there for support." Dr. Simmons nodded. "That's very mature and very brave." I wrote back agreeing to meet in December during winter break. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near campus with Grace Johnson coming as my support person. The meeting was awkward and painful. My mother cried a lot and talked about her own religious trauma, about growing up in a church that taught her to fear anything outside rigid gender and sexuality norms. She admitted she'd been terrified when she found my journal, because it meant confronting everything she'd been taught. She said she was learning, slowly, to separate her faith from the harmful teachings she'd absorbed. "I can't undo what I did," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't take back the exorcism or the therapy or trying to send you away. But I want you to know I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to be better." I listened without offering easy forgiveness. The hurt was still too raw, the damage too extensive, but I agreed to keep the lines of communication open, to exchange emails and maybe meet again in a few months. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a start. My father never reached out. Pastor Vincent eventually left our church after more families came forward with stories of harmful practices. The church leadership tried to distance themselves from his methods, claiming they'd been unaware of how extreme things had gotten. On my 19th birthday, surrounded by friends from college and holding hands with Jasmine, I thought about the girl who'd hidden her journal in a hollowed-out book, terrified someone would discover the truth about who she was. That girl had been through hell, had been restrained and exorcised, and nearly shipped off to a place designed to break her. But she'd survived, she'd fought back. She'd found people who loved her exactly as she was. And now, standing in my own life with my own choices, I was finally free. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.